Welcome everybody and good afternoon. Sorry we're running a little behind, but we can get started now. Thank you so much for giving me some time to share the hot tips developing and submitting EPA approvable water quality standards presentation. My name is CJ Tuh-way and I'm a scientist at EPA Region 9. I primarily work on water quality standard for states, tribes, and I also work on tribal consultation, review of tribal water quality standard packages, and I also work a little bit on the California Beach Act. So the purpose of this presentation is to give tribes a more general idea and looking at bigger concepts for water quality standards. We don't want to get into the technical details of developing, the specific water quality standards, but rather give you some of these big hot tips for working through, this complex process of developing and revising water quality standards that are pursuant to the Clean Water Act. So today we have this presentation, and then we're going to have some time for some Q&A. And for people online, if you have any questions, you can just pop those in the chat. So here we have a list representing the water quality standards assessment section. I want you guys to take a look at just how few of us there are. But we are readily available to help work on tribes' water quality standard packages. Our priority is to support water quality standard expertise, some technical work, and to get tribes' packages approved to assist water quality standards. We are currently working with many tribes at varying stages of water quality standards development. And our first hot tip of the day is that your grant project officer is always there to help. So this is the person who manages your grants and helps you get through your treatment as a state process. So getting authority or treatment as a state is to help tribes get authority to implement and manage environmental programs, also to help with functioning for those programs and grant funding. However, I want you to take note that this is not the same as the staff who's going to review your TAS application. Also, your tribal project officer is different than the staff who's reviewing your actual package. So the team you should contact regarding your package and any water quality standard questions would be the names you see on the screen. However, it is good to keep in touch with your tribal PO, just to know if you got certifications, keeping up on your TAS certification 401. Speaking of 401, supporting tribal water quality standards at EPA is really important. And one important certification to have is 401 certification, which can be really useful. This can provide tribes with an important tool to protect water quality of federal regulated waters within tribal borders. So it's basically going to allow tribes to write their own water quality standards, or not their own standards, but their own write their own permits. Another hot tip is that Diane Fleck is our Region 9 Water Quality Standards Coordinator. She can help you get started, but you guys can also reach out to really anybody on our team. We're all willing to help, and we all kind of have the same goal. So here we're going to be talking about the Clean Water Act, just kind of giving you an overview of what it is and what Section 101A2 is. So in the opening chapter of the Clean Water Act, Congress speaks to the objective of the goals for the act. So in particular, Section 101A, which you will hear a lot, it states the objective to restore, maintain the chemical and physical and biological integrity of the nation's waters. So more importantly, this act is focused on the restoration and protection of water quality. So Congress specifically set this goal to define water quality standards, and they define this as maintaining and restoring waters to be fishable and swimmable. So the Clean Water Act itself lays out mainly the framework for the water quality standards program. And these sections describe the roles for authorized tribes, making it clear that they have the primary role in establishing their own water quality standards and submitting those to EPA for review. So for this presentation, I will be talking mainly to the tribes, but just know that this is also applicable to states and territories. And our hot tip for this slide will be that if you have a 101A2 use that are not actually on the designated use, then a tribe needs to conduct a use attainability analysis, so a UAA. And this is basically when a state or tribe doesn't include the fishable or swimmable use. So some factors considered in the analysis are the physical, chemical, and economic use removal criteria, and these are described in EPA's water quality standard regulations. And tribes must re-examine waters that do not include these fishable and swimmable uses to determine if the new information is if new information is available, making that water body fishable and swimmable. So most of you already know mainly the 3 parts of a water quality standard, and EPA updated aspects to each of these back in 2015. So it's really important to make sure that you have the most up-to-date criteria and documents. I also want to make a plug for the Tribal Water Quality Standards template, and this is going to include all of these updates, which we will discuss more in the upcoming slides. So for uses, states and tribes should identify the use they want for their waters. Many states provide a table of water bodies and their uses. And why is this so important? These uses are going to establish water quality goals for a specific water body, and these are going to be able to communicate these goals to the public. Uses also lead to decisions of what water quality criteria level is required for each water body. And a hot tip here is tribes must take into consideration the use and the value of waters for public water supply, for industrial and agricultural uses, and for navigation. And this is also in addition to the fishable and swimmable uses. Another important thing to note is that the minimum requirement is that there be both fishable and swimmable uses, and some examples of these are fish consumption, aquatic life use protection, and recreational uses. And states and tribes may also have other additional uses, which were talked about in some other sessions, like cultural tribal uses, domestic water supply, irrigation, agriculture, and there can be multiple uses for any given water body. For criteria, so these are going to be elements of the tribe's water quality standards. So they're usually expressed as concentrations, levels, narrative statements, and they represent a quality of water that supports a particular use. So when criteria are met, water quality will generally protect the designated uses. And criteria must be based on sound scientific rationale and must contain sufficient parameters to protect these designated uses. So for waters with multiple use designations, it's really important to note that the criteria has to support the most sensitive use. So if you already have these 101A2 fishable and swimmable uses, and you add on other uses to that water body, it's already going to protect that most sensitive use, which is your fishable and swimmable waters. So EPA aquatic life and human health criteria can also be downloaded in a printable form using our tribal template. And EPA develops recommended criteria, which many tribes will adopt, or they will develop their own criteria. And I just want to plug this in one more time, that it's important to check our 304A criteria tables. And here's one hot tip on this slide, is that on that table, there is a column for the publication year. And this is going to show the most recent update for each pollution. So as I said, they're always constantly being updated. So this can show you, okay, acrolein was updated back in maybe 2015. Finally, while not new, please remember that your water quality standards must protect downstream uses. And if they do not, you can consider adopting a narrative downstream protection provision. And this provision really acts, or it's really a case-by-case basis depending on what pollutant you're looking at. But it acts as an overlay to any numeric criteria to provide that even though your criteria is different from what's downstream, it's still protective. And finally, we can move on to anti-degradation. So anti-degradation, I feel like it's a little more simpler than the other two. But basically, anti-degradation policy, it's to maintain the water quality that has already been achieved. So the act doesn't allow for any degradation, and honestly, it's the backstop for water quality. And the anti-degradation policy must be accompanied with an implementation policy as well. So the methods for your anti-degradation policy, they must be consistent with the implementation. And EPA won't act on your actual implementation policy, but if it's not consistent with your anti-deg, then we have bounds to maybe disapprove. And then here, this is the table of contents and for the water quality standards template. So the template is a tool that tribes can use to build their own water quality standards. The template is annotated and it gives helpful information and tools for populating your specific standards. And the model is also a fillable Word template, so it will provide you some guidance, citations, standard language, and it will help you build your approvable water quality standards. And EPA, we expect that tribes will be able to incorporate the template language directly into their draft water quality standards. And this can be after tribes have made changes to the text and to the tables in coordination with their regional EPA office. And then one hot tip here is to always start with the template and utilize it. And this is important because it can help avoid inconsistencies, out-of-date criteria that we see when reviewing these packages. And another hot tip is to update your draft standards if you started drafting while applying for TAS and got approved maybe years later. So if you started drafting in, 2010, and then you didn't get approved for TAS maybe 3 years later, your standards or your draft is probably going to be out of date and you're going to have a lot of out of date criteria. Policies might have changed, and we advise you to go back to the template, because the template is a living document and you can update your standards as long as the template's being updated. So another important thing to note is that to avoid copying other people's or other states, tribes' water quality standards, this is because they may also be out of date, or you may have downstream water that you need to be protective of. You can also use other tribes. You can look at their standards for guidance, but we advise not copying it directly for numerics or any like narrative criteria, just because each tribe situation and local conditions are unique. So coordination with the EPA regional office is important, just because if you follow the template, that alone isn't going to give you approval for your water quality standards to be approved. And then another hot tip is if the tribe is working with a contractor, it's really important that they as well are using the tribal template, just because with working with some tribes, the contractors aren't aware that there's a template out there, which is mainly for the benefit of the tribes. So if you're working with a contractor, it's good to communicate with them, hey, there's this template out there that EPA made. It can help us get approvable standards quicker. And then here we can just jump into some of the table of contents for the template. And since we already talked about a few of them, we may just skip over those. But we'll start out with the waters. So waters of the reservation, it's really important to ID waters on your reservation. I know this can be private information to tribes, so it's really up to the tribe if they want to share that information with EPA. But just know that if you do, it can help us with locating maybe different like wastewater treatment facility plants that are nearby. And it can also be helpful when we have to revise or consult tribes with their biological evaluations. Another thing to look at is definitions. So the template has about 36 definitions, and not all will be necessary to include, but it's nice to know they're there, especially the ones that will apply to your water quality standard package. And then since we've already touched on our criteria and anti-deg policy, we'll just go down to mixing zone. And so for your mixing zone, well, these last three bullet points here, these are going to be more of the implementing policies. So they're generally aimed at permits. So for mixing zone, it's really nice to have clear bounds on your mixing zone policy, maybe include a description of your general procedures, and maybe it's also good to include maybe like the location, size, your outfall design. And for your compliance schedules, if you want to use those, you're going to need a authorizing provision. And similarly for your water quality standard variances, for those provisions, you're going to want to use an authorizing provision as well. So a variance is a temporary change to the use and criteria of a water body based on specific factors. So for your provision, one of the main important things to include in there would to be that tribes or that your variance is subject to EPA review for either approval or disapproval before becoming effective. So basically, EPA has to review this before your variance can become effective. And then here we have an actual snapshot of what the template actually looks like. And I can show or give you an idea of how to navigate from our EPA Tools for Tribes website. So you can just click on the link that says Tribal Water Quality Standards Template, and then that will lead you to another link for the Word doc. And you can see on the right that the template it has this blue bold right here. And what's in that bold is fillable. It's fillable and it has instructions on it as well. And what's in the regular font is what you can directly copy from the template as long as it fits your specific needs for your tribe's waters. So one of the hot tips here is that EPA strongly recommends tribes use the template because criteria is often updated and the template is a living document. And then another hot tip is for drafts pre-2015, we suggest starting back with the template since 2015, a lot has changed and criteria is always being updated. And one thing that I've noticed since I've started working on the packages is that the first thing that we can see is the criteria that it doesn't match, and that's a pretty important aspect of the package. All right, here we have this template is going to provide an easily downloadable copy of EPA's recommended 304A criteria. So that's our aquatic life criteria. So our template has about 26 pollutants. So not all pollutants are listed on our criteria table. So, but if a tribe wishes to add pollutants not on the 304A criteria table, they can, but you're just going to need to provide some justification on why your numbers are protective enough and why the water body, those designated uses will still be protected. So some pollutants are numbers. As you can see here, we have acrolein. It has an acute value of 3 micrograms per liter and chronic value of 3 micrograms per liter. So those are just pretty simple numbers. And then you can also have pollutants like aluminum. These are going to be more dependent on pH, total hardness, and dissolved organic carbon. And these are factors that can affect the toxicity of aluminum while in the water. So EPA has tools for running these models and equations on our website. We have documents and fact sheets that go over the science of how they figured out why these equations work, how they got these models. And there's another thing to remember is that you can set your own criteria as long as they can be demonstrated as protective. So it's really important, one of the hot tips, to explain or always provide justification. And then another hot tip is to check for updates to EPA's recommended criteria. So that's going to be our criteria tables. And then the last hot tip for this slide is going to be including all this language that you see here for aluminum. You want to include that in your package for not just for aluminum, but for the model and equation-based pollutants. So this will help determine the baseline water quality. It also helps with monitoring and for our ESA consultation. And one thing that we've been finding out is that we need particular information to conclude that these applications of the models and the equations will be protective. So here we have our human health criteria table. The template allows you to download the human health criteria table, and 94 of these were updated in 2015. So the hot tip here is that the template also has a human health calculator, which is on our right. And this is going to allow tribes to customize their criteria for each tribe's different variables. So on the actual calculator side, on the left, we have our fish consumption rate. So increasing consumption rates make the criteria values more stringent. There are some of the these are some of the recommended values, but again, you can input your own values dependent on how much fish or any type of critters that your tribe may consume. And on the right, we have the cancer risk level, and these are only going to affect criteria that are carcinogens. So going from 1 in 1 million to 1 in 10 million is going to make the criteria 10 times more stringent. And then if you go from 1 in a million to 1 in 100,000, you're going to make your criteria 10 times less stringent. And here we're just going to be talking about water quality standards development and going through the submittal process. So your first step is getting treatment as a state, and that process is completed through your tribal project officer. And after you get the treatment as a state for your water quality standards, you're going to want to begin drafting your water quality standards. And EPA is really committed to early review and looking at drafts, giving you guidance on that, and providing feedback. And once you have drafted your water quality standards, the Clean Water Act requires you to go through a public process period. And that's one of our hot tips. The public process can take anywhere between 2 to 6+ months. This is really why it's important to plan ahead and understand that this process requires time and that it's dependent on the complexity of revisions, the extent of the comments that you receive, and all the comments that you receive, you still have to respond to all those comments to the public. So this is a good way for outreach to neighboring jurisdictions, stakeholders, other tribes, states, so they can give input on the standards that you're proposing to implicate. One thing to note is the adoption at the tribe level can be different at each tribe, depending on your own laws and processes. And if you've made substantive revisions after your public comment period, we advise that you share with EPA. That's one of our hot tips, is to keep your EPA liaison up to date on any changes. And it's really good to give us a heads up before you formally submit, just because we can make sure your package is good and good to go, in good shape, and does not require any further revisions, because once you formally submit, it takes a lot of work and planning if you want to change something after that. Another hot tip is to keep your EPA liaison up to date. Oh, sorry about that. All right, I want you all to walk with me through the process of EPA's review and action after you formally submit. So it's important to remember that mainly the statute says that states and tribes are to develop their water quality standards, but it also establishes the requirement that only EPA-approved water quality standards become effective for Clean Water Act purposes. So basically, we have to approve before your standards go into effect. So in the first box, while it's the role of the tribes to develop their standards, EPA plays a large role in early coordination. So we want to work with our partners to develop these standards. Most of our partners use EPA Clean Water Act grant funds to support their water quality standards. We are currently in early engagement on about 17 tribal water quality standard packages. Some of these can take months, others years to submit and get approved. Once a tribe submits a package of standards to us for review and action, either approval or disapproval, the Act sets out that the timelines for EPA's review, we have 60 days to approve, or we have 90 days to disapprove. And if EPA approves, the water quality standard becomes effective for Clean Water Act purposes immediately. If EPA disapproves, the statute requires EPA to propose and promulgate, which is basically to make known of a standard, but usually this doesn't happen very often. If it does happen, or oftentimes a state is changing a standard that was previously approved by EPA, so you already have some type of standard on the books. And if we disapprove your new proposed standard, then that underlying standard that you have already will stay in effect. EPA may also delay promulgation because a state or tribe is amending their water quality standards to adopt appropriate standards in their next triennial review. So if you have a standard that we disapprove, but the thing is, and it's not gonna be in your standards anymore, but then if you want it to be in your standards, you can add it in your next TR. And the hot tip here is meeting these timelines. If we want to meet these timelines, we have to have strong early engagement throughout the development process of tribes drafting their standards. So if we catch errors or out-of-date criteria and confusing language early, then once a tribe formally submits, there's a lot higher chances that we can meet these deadlines. Okay. So what does EPA look for in our review? Our regulations at 131.5 describe what EPA review must involve, and section 131.6 describes the information an authorized tribe must submit to EPA. This can include certification by the state attorney general that the water quality standards were duly adopted pursuant to the state law. So here are some key things that we consider when looking at the whole package. We want to know if the submitted standards meet the requirements of the Act and implementing regulations. We also want to look at if the criteria sufficiently protects the designated uses and if these criteria are based on sound science. We also want to make sure that the public participation requirements are being followed. And one thing we really look at is the completeness of the package. So we want to make sure that tribes aren't missing any key factors that are important to their specific tribe. So if a tribe is really worried about human health criteria, they want to make sure that that criteria is protective of their waters. And another example is if they have dissolved oxygen criteria, we want to make sure that they have it for either warm, cold, or both, whatever you have listed in your designated uses on your package. Another good hot tip is that your water quality liaison should know before you submit so there aren't any errors before formally submitting. It's also to make sure EPA and the tribe are on the same page. This is going to avoid confusion from both sides. And here, there are going to be two other legal obligations that EPA must consider when reviewing water quality standards. So these important obligations can be complex and may take some time, and I touched a little bit on it earlier with the ESA consultation. So ESA, EPA is required to consult with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services and NOAA National Marine Fishery Services. We refer to them as just the services, and this is to ensure our actions aren't going to negatively affect threatened and endangered species. So EPA makes a determination based on scientific review what effect the proposed action will have on these threatened and endangered species. And what we do is conduct an effects analysis. So this is an analysis so we have all the pollutants on your criteria table and you have your endangered species. So we do a match of each of those and we look at the analyses of if this pollutant that you're proposing, is that going to negatively affect this endangered species? So this can cause some timing challenges and complications of biological evaluations. One hot tip here is EPA starts early when conducting ESA consultation. Starting early in the process with us allows us to develop our BE and our effects analysis, which helps us meet certain timelines. And then the second important consultation we engage in is tribal consultation. So we offer government-to-government consultation with federally recognized tribes that may be affected by our action. So tribes can offer us important factors to consider that may not have been included in the packages submitted to EPA. So this can include impacts to cultural uses. It can also include upstream or downstream interaction with their own standards. And it's also good to hear the aspect and view from or aspect and viewpoint from the tribes, because our goal for tribal consultation is to take the information the tribes are giving us and make sure that they can see that in our action. Historically, Region 9 didn't offer tribal consultation on a regular basis, but now it's a regular part, or it's a part of our SOP on all water quality standard actions. So this has improved our communication with our tribal partners, and it ensures transparency and honors tribal consultation obligations with these tribes. Another good thing about tribal consultation is that it addresses any important environmental justice issues that are occurring within that area. While the current number of tribal consultation requests that we've been getting back from the invitations has been more on the low side, I think that with an increase in our outreach and early engagement with the tribes, this can really improve. And here we have our, just wanted to touch up on the triennial reviews, so the TRs. So for Clean Water Act, Section 303C, it requires that states and tribes hold a public hearing to review their water quality standards at least every 3 years, or as appropriate, to modify and adopt water quality standards. So one important thing is that you don't have to wait until that 3-year period. You can do it anytime you really want, as long as you're coordinating it with EPA. So the triennial review requires communication with the public and what standards are proposed to be changed. It also focuses around what water quality standards are up to date with the current EPA regulation and recommendations. We also look at if there are only a few revisions or if there's multiple revisions. This can come into play when thinking of timing and if it's feasible for EPA to get all these revisions reviewed in the TR. And then here we have some resources that EPA can provide tribes in assisting them in writing their water quality standards. So we have on our website, we have the regulations, guidance, and requirements. This is all going to be, you'll find most of this information on the EPA water quality standards tools for tribes website. This is going to contain the model water quality standards template, which is definitely something tribes should take advantage of and use. We're also going to have our EPA 304 criteria tables there. And then along with that, you'll have the human health criteria calculator. And then we have some contacts here. This Tina Yin, who's my manager at Region 9 of the Water Quality Standards and Assessment section. And you have Diane Fleck, who's the Water Quality Standards Coordinator. And then you have me, CJ Tuh-way, I'm the Water Quality Standards Tribal Liaison. And there's also some really good training and reference materials out there. So we have our EPA Water Quality Standards Handbook. They also provide the Water Quality Standards Academy, and they have combined this with the Tribal Water Quality Standards Academy. I actually took this back in April, and it really gives good information and an overlay of what standards are, and it goes pretty in depth with criteria, uses, mixing zone policy, anti-deg, everything that goes into making your package. So attending this, I really advise going to it. And that's what we really have here today. I wanted to make sure I save some time for some questions. But I also invite any of the tribes, if you want to share any experiences about working on your standards and your packages and what lessons you learned or what worked and what didn't work, but you don't have to. You can ask me questions. So thank you.
Any questions?
I guess I have a couple questions. If the tribe obtains a permit, say through the NPDES permit or a wetland permit 401 certification, and the tribe has no standards, what do they base their decision on the permitting? I thought it was an adjoining jurisdiction. So if I'm in California, would the EPA issue that permit based on California standards?
Sorry, the microphone is not clear. Could you repeat that, please?
Sure. If I'm on an Indian reservation and I'm
Right.
in the state of California
Right.
and the tribe obtains an NPDES permit or any other type of water quality permit from EPA, would they base, I thought that they based those on an adjoining jurisdiction, which would be the state of California. So I guess the question being, if I'm a tribe with no water quality standards, what does the US EPA base their permit requirements on for?
So with permitting, it has to do with your 401 certification as well. That is a pretty good question, though, that I could bring back to my team.
The reason I ask is it's in the state of California has relatively good standards and they're a pretty protective state.
Right.
But if some states are not known for such protections,
Mhm.
Nevada, Oklahoma, other states. So I just think as a tribe, if I'm in the state of California, it might be a lesser priority or less effort than I'm in a state that has not those type of good protective standards. That's why I'm bringing up.
Right.
Because I just been looking at the process recently, the 401 certification, they have now the adjoining jurisdiction and tribes can obtain their authorization to be a 401 cert person. It seems like a less cumbersome process to get your water, your treatment as a state as a 401 certification than the water quality standards, and you'll be reaching the same goals. Just an observation.
No, I agree. I agree.
I just wanted to say, Tina, your manager, said in the chat box, for permit limits on tribal waters with no water quality standards, the EPA permit writer does look to the downstream standards as well as other factors.
Yeah, considering the 401 cert, they said they wouldn't base it on adjoining. So I think they are, I guess you have to look at the downstream, which might most likely be the adjoining state. Then on the water quality standards question more, recently they've had court decisions that lessen the waters of the United States. Now it seems like you have to be connected with a navigable water, and before you could have groundwater connections or be isolated waters such as like prairie potholes. So in the Southwest, many tribes don't have very perennial streams. In the Clear Lake Basin, we have a threatened fish that lives in the lake, which is permanent, and they go into these very ephemeral streams. The streams may only have water 3 or 4 months a year, and they return. So does the body of water have to be considered a water of the United States for these standards to apply?
Sorry, repeat that last part. That was the main important part.
Yeah, I guess that's what. Do the waters need to be defined as waters of the United States for the standards to apply?
Yes, they do have to be defined as WOTUS for standards to apply. But if you don't, say if you have a water on your reservation that isn't WOTUS, then you don't need EPA approval on those waters.
So a tribe can designate waters of the reservation that are not considered waters of the United States?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Other tribes, okay.
Here, do you want to repeat, sorry, for the people online?
If you designate water bodies as waters of the tribes, they won't have the federal level of protection for like 401. It'll be on the tribe to have those protections, in that your ordinances or your bylaws will have to protect those water bodies and say your public works is doing some work and it's not technically waters of the US, but you've designated that area waters of the tribe. They would still have to go through you and get a permit if you have those things in place. And if you don't, then there's where that gray area is, where there could be gaps in protection if it's not considered waters of the US and the tribe hasn't put in those mechanisms to protect those water bodies. But those are all things that you can do when you're developing your standards. You could have waters of the US and have standards for that, and you can have waters of the tribes that maybe with the WOTUS won't be considered waters of the US, but you can still have your own protections on them.
I guess that doesn't show, like even in the state of California, we might have very good protections, my tribe would want to designate those waters of the reservation so we can protect waters that might not be considered waters of the U.S. Thank you.
And then there's another comment from Tina here. Tribes can have water quality standards for tribal waters. The water quality standards that EPA approves apply to waters of the U.S. for Clean Water Act purposes.
Thank you, Tina. And thanks for the questions. Those were really good.
Hi, Madison with Summit Lake Paiute Tribe. So I just wanted to make sure that I understand. You listed a lot of useful tools. Thank you for that. For the water quality template, I did see obviously there's the numeric water quality standards. That's part of developing the standards. For those resources, is it mainly the water quality calculator and then just reaching out to you guys for help on that? Or are there extra hidden tools or resources or tips for developing the numeric standards based off of the QA of the data?
Right. So for the calculator, that's more geared towards your human health criteria. And then for your, I say like aquatic life, either fresh or salt water, you can look at our EPA 3 or 4A criteria tables. So those only have about maybe 26 to 30 pollutants on there. Your tribe can add other pollutants if you want, but then you would have to provide some type of scientific justification on why did you pick these numbers? How did you get there? Some other tools that we provide are the equation and model-based documents. So for like selenium, ammonia, aluminum, those are the more complicated ones where I would think the tribes would want to contact us because it gets confusing. It even confuses me sometimes. So
Yes.
I think that answer your question?
Yeah. So the numeric part of it is mainly on just developing the pollutant, the pollution. Man, what's the word?
The criteria.
Yeah, the pollution criteria, and not developing like the phosphorus standards and like, for example, like phosphorus,
Right.
Carbonate, all that. It's based off of just the main pollutants that are listed in that table.
So
Okay.
that table, they each have like a document attached to it too on how EPA got those numbers. So is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's pretty much me and my department for developing this, and
Right.
this is all brand new. We just got TAS this year, so
Right.
I'm starting from scratch,
Okay.
and I'm gonna start with the tools that you gave me, and I just wanted to make sure that I'm not missing out on anything, especially for the numeric part, because that's honestly
Right.
what's scaring me the most of this whole
We
thing.
can also chat after too if you want to
Okay.
talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you.
I think we have time for one more question. Is there anything online? Okay, yeah, and we have another comment here from Tina. There are lots of tools on EPA's website beyond the tribal template, including the Water Quality Standards Handbook and all the types of resources CJ has mentioned.
The EPA also has a water quality standards academy. Usually it's an in-person. They do it twice a year. There's gonna be a virtual option soon, and so look into that. I've attended it. It's great. You get to go to headquarters and actually meet with the people who kind of develop these programs. And if you have questions, they kind of help you get through the nitty gritty. And a lot of times the calculations are more simplified if you talk to someone who's actually done it or helped develop it. And if you are intimidated by it, I would look up the EPA website or maybe contact your project officer and ask when that's coming up. If you can get in there or get priority, because it's really helpful. It'll make that mountain much smaller.
Yeah, I think registration's open right now. So I would advise to register for that. I'm going again. So just to reestablish some of the main concepts that they teach there.
All right, last minute.
I guess just one comment. It's great that tribes are building this capacity, but each one of these new responsibilities that come under the tribe take more staff time, more resources. So as tribes get these responsibilities, the water quality standards, 401 certification, there's the triennial review the tribe must do, or in the 401 case, you need to respond to authorizations in a timely way. The EPA should consider more funding for those tribes that obtain those authorizations and levels of responsibility, because you're still giving the same baseline funding, and we have our WQX requirements, the WQAR requirements, and these are just more requirements onto the tribe with still the same limited funding.
I understand your frustration with the funding. I believe with the grant funding, I know that we have our 319, our 106. I can't speak too much on it. I don't know a lot about the funding, but I know that tribes do deserve to be staffed to be able to manage their sections, to be able to, hire people to help them more. I agree with you.
Okay, I think I have to shut this down, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.